What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
What's going on, guys? It's week 5, Cashing Points. Jake Tribbey here with Graham Barfield and Ryan Heath to talk through a pretty nice 10-game slate. Feels very wide open from a DFS perspective this week. Let's get right into it, guys. Denver Broncos at the Philadelphia Eagles. Denver, 3.5-point underdog here. Total is 43.5. This game is very clean from an injury perspective. That's one of the only times you'll hear me say this. This is a very injury-riddled slate, especially at the skill positions. Graham, I'll start with you on the Eagles side of this game. You know, A.J. Brown's at his cheapest price point since week 6 of 2020. He's likely going to need to deal with Patrick Surtain here. Saquon Barkley at 7,500 is always a little interesting, but the Broncos have been a brutal rushing matchup. Do you have any interest on the Eagles side of this game?
Yeah, overall, it's just a really gross Eagles offense right now. They're just extremely run heavy, second most run heavy team in the league. They're playing really slow. They're the 4th slowest offense in terms of just pace of play. And like you mentioned, yeah, it's a tough spot for A.J. Brown. It's also kind of a tough spot for Devonta Smith. The Broncos have been pretty good against slot receivers. Smith has been running more of his routes from the slot. I want to continue to kind of buy low on Saquon, but again, I think this game is going to be pretty slow paced. I don't really have a whole lot of interest, to be honest, in this Eagles side. It's kind of a tricky game. 43.5 total, like you said. Yeah, it's tough, man. Like Courtland Sutton on the other side too. Like we've been banging the drum for Sutton for quite some time, Jake, but he's got a pretty difficult matchup here too.
Yeah, he does. And, you know, that's the tough thing about this game for me in particular is that this is one of, you know, kind of all the games on the slate. This is one of the easiest ones to see, just playing a little slow, a little gross. I mean, that's true of any game involving the Eagles. I don't think I mind, you know, a little bit of A.J. Brown, a little bit of Saquon, especially in some sort of like MME set, but certainly not going out of my way to play those guys in like a single entry or a 3-max here. Ryan, I'm curious what you think about this spot for the Broncos passing attack. I know you had some interesting stuff to say on Troy Franklin in particular in advanced matchups.
Yeah, really, Franklin is the only play I'm particularly interested in this game. He's just down at 4K, and even before you get into the matchup stuff, like that's just too cheap for what his role has been since week 2. Over that time frame, leads the team in route participation, first read target share, nearly 14 expected fantasy points per game. Leads the league in screen targets. Like his usage is just really good. It's very high floor and also arguably high ceiling against this Eagles defense because they have been very vulnerable against play action specifically. Broncos run a lot of it, and Franklin is their main target on play action. 43% target per route run rate on it. Yeah, it's just kind of the perfect setup where Sutton is getting shadowed by Quinyon Mitchell on the outside. Franklin, yeah, in the slot has to deal with Cooper DeJean, but just because so much of his stuff is designed, it kind of makes it easy. He doesn't actually have to separate against DeJean. He's just going to get peppered with targets on these nice design looks. And it's not just like behind the line of scrimmage, low ADOT stuff. Franklin's ADOT on design targets on play action is over 7 yards downfield. I think back to that one play that had RJ Harvey had the ball like go over his head where he slowed up on the route. That Peyton just designs all of that where it's like, yeah, he can catch and run. He's already downfield, and it's mostly Franklin getting it. So really good play at 4K, by far my favorite play in the game. Can make a lot of the kind of expensive builds work. I don't really. There's some other cheap receivers, some other value on this slate, but Franklin is, especially at the receiver position, my favorite way to get that.
Yeah, this wide receiver 2 role on the Broncos has become very legit. It's not just Courtland Sutton and a gross rotation anymore. Looks like Troy Franklin and his role pop is a pretty solid play. And, you know, just looking at the projections in this game, no one really stands out as a value outside of Troy Franklin, who still doesn't project particularly well. We are the highest on him right now across the industry, but only 2% ownership for a guy who's 4K, and I think has a pretty solid ceiling, as Ryan outlined in this spot. All right, let's keep it moving. New York Giants at the New Orleans Saints. Giants are 1.5 underdogs here. Total is 42.5. On the injury front, Malik Neighbors unfortunately done for the year. Tyrone Tracy is doubtful and expected to miss another week. On the Saints side, Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau are both questionable after being activated off of PUP. Jawan Johnson also questionable with an ankle issue after limited practices on Thursday and Friday. Graham, a guy that we talked about in the early look was Jackson Dart, and I'm still pretty excited to play Jackson Dart as we've gotten later in the week. Doesn't look like he's going to pick up too much ownership here. And like I mentioned on early look, I think the most encouraging thing for Dart is that he had 7 designed rushes in his first start. This is a really strong role from a fantasy perspective. What do you think of Dart in a Giants offense that is now without, their clear best player in Malik Neighbors?
Yeah, I don't know how much it matters because, like you said, they just did so much design stuff with Dart, but this is a good matchup. Saints giving up the 3rd most passing fantasy points per dropback, so that strips out rushing, just looking strictly at passing. But yeah, I mean, they were just so run heavy. This game has some sneaky shootout appeal, like we were just talking through Eagles-Broncos, right? And that game has a 43.5 total. This is at 42.5. Saints are the fastest paced team in the NFL right now. Giants ran a lot more no huddle, a lot more up tempo with Dart, but yeah, I have serious questions about just like the overall NFL readiness of this offense. And then you mix in the fact they just lost Malik Neighbors. It's not great. I think Cam Scatterby is a pretty good play, but Jake, you were on this last week, Dart scrambling more, probably going to have fewer dump offs to the running back. And that just kind of winded up being the case for Scatterby. He only had 2 targets last week. I have no interest in like Wan'Dale Robinson. I think if you're stacking Dart, Darius Slayton is my favorite way to go. 4,300 for him. 2 games that Neighbors missed last year. Slayton did have a 30% target share, but that was a totally different offense. That was with Daniel Jones under center. But like I said, good matchup. Saints are also, giving up the 2nd most yards per route run to opposing outside wide receivers. Only Dallas is giving up more. So if I'm stacking Dart in this game, it's with Slayton.
Yeah, I do like that Dart Darius Slayton angle. Darius Slayton, last 2 games that Malik Neighbors missed, he was at 21 expected fantasy points, 11 targets per game. Just an awesome workload for Slayton. I'm not necessarily expecting that here, but as cheap stacks go, I think that's one of the more interesting ones on the week 5 main slate. Ryan, curious if you have any other thoughts on the Giants offense here, or if you have thoughts on the Saints. What do you think of this game?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to echo what Graham said about this being a possible sneaky shootout. Yeah, the Saints play so fast, it always encourages that. Both of these defenses have been top 6 pass funnels by pass rate over expectation allowed. So I think it's interesting, but honestly, I prefer to play it from the Saints side, where we have Spencer Rattler at 4,800. And it's Spencer Rattler. Like it's not, I'm not going to do an amazing job of talking him up here, but the Giants do lead the NFL in man coverage rate. We see Rattler's deep throw rate actually go up to 20% against man coverage this year. He's just been a lot more aggressive. That's 2nd highest behind only Josh Allen. All of his fantasy point per drop back splits are excellent against man compared to zone as well. And the way that he's gotten there has been through Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Both of those guys have a 29% target share against man coverage looks. Shaheed up over 3 yards per route run. Olave projects well, as he has every single week, just because the role is so good. 2nd most expected fantasy points per game on the season. But Shaheed also gives you that kind of extra field stretching element. He can be a man beater on the outside. There was some positive coach speak about Shaheed as well this week, just kind of talking about getting him some more design touches, some more looks, just increases the floor a bit too for a 4,500 play there. So yeah, as cheap stacks go, I just Rattler, Shaheed, Olave. You can bring it back with Scatterby. I don't think you have to. I think that's pretty solid. Jawan Johnson is in play, and he will be until they raise his price. But yeah, just 3,900 again. Maybe a slight concern with Taysom Hill coming back, but I still think he's a great value. The big thing is just there are so many good tight end plays on this slate that I don't know that I'm going to actually get to that much Jawan, especially just with the schematic being a little bit better for Shaheed and Olave.
Yeah, and Juwan is a little beat up, questionable designation going into this. I don't think we see a ton of Taysom or a ton of Foster Moreau if they end up active in this one, but it is just a little bit concerning for Juwan. And like Ryan said, ton of great tight end plays on the slate, ton of great running back plays as well across this slate. And yeah, definitely agree that this game does have some sneaky shootout potential. I feel like any game with the Saints does. I was just looking through our game projections. We have this game projected for just a hair over 128 plays, which is about the most you'll see us project for any game. And, that's largely just because the Saints pace is crazy. Of course, the offenses aren't anything special, but, when you get a fast paced environment, you only need a couple big plays to really break things open there. So I do think that's an interesting game to stack, and everyone's really cheap with no Malik Neighbors. Let's move it on. Las Vegas Raiders at the Indianapolis Colts. This game is a little bit more fun from a total perspective at 47.5. The Raiders are 7-point underdogs. On the injury front, Brock Bowers questionable. He missed both Thursday and Friday practice. Also, no Alec Pierce. He did not clear concussion protocol. Slot cornerback Kenny Moore is also out for the Colts. Michael Pittman, good to go, though. He has no designation for Week 5. Graham, let's start with the grosser side of this game in the Raiders. I don't necessarily think this is a spot to play Ashton Genty, just given his lack of receiving work. Raiders 7-point dogs here. But I do think this is a pretty interesting spot for Geno Smith. Colts secondary just got shredded so bad last week that they had a defensive back retire. Geno also, he hasn't played particularly well, but his stacking partners are cheap. I think it's a very straightforward stack this week with Trey Tucker and Jacoby Myers. And I also think, and, Graham, I know this is something I mentioned to you a handful of times, these quarterbacks who throw a lot of interceptions can be good for DFS. Maybe, you could call Geno Smith maybe like a Jameis Winston light right now with the way he's playing, where, the offense isn't great, but when you throw a pick six, when you throw a lot of interceptions, that can force your team to, push pace up a little bit more. What do you think of the Raiders side of this game here?
Yeah, Geno's okay. For all the reasons you mentioned, he's super boomer bust. This definitely seems like a better matchup for him, but he crumbled against the Bears last week. I think Ashton Genty's okay, though. He's not like an amazing play like you lined up. There's just so many good running back plays on the slate. Omar and Hampton is, in my opinion, a significantly better play at 200 cheaper. We'll get to that game, though. But I think Genty's okay. You can run on the Colts. My note in this game is that the Colts are giving up the fourth most yards per carry on zone blocking concepts, and that's pretty much all they're using Genty on. I like Daniel Jones and Michael Pittman stacks, though. I know it's like, Jones is finally kind of the right price, 5,800. Raiders are very burnable in the secondary. It's really just like Max Crosby just trying to wreak havoc out there. But he kind of let everybody down last week, but I think his floor is pretty high. And like you said, this is a shootout game environment for sure. It's a pretty good spot. And Pittman is in an amazing matchup. Vegas is giving up the second most yards per game to outside wide receivers, and Pittman's an amazing price. His price has actually come down week over week, which is awesome. 5,100 for him is a very, very nice price.
Yeah, absolutely. Colts fairly easy to stack up. Ryan, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the Colts side of this game, specifically the pass catchers, and then we can talk Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, man. I think Pittman works. He's fine. But to me, it's really Tyler Warren week. So the Raiders, this is another defense that has really, really struggled against play action, allowing the 5th most yards per attempt, 3rd highest CPOE against play action. The Colts have run it the most in the NFL, and Tyler Warren is almost always their target on these play action looks. He is averaging 6.47 yards per route run on play action, which is just completely insane. 74% of his yardage on the season has come on those plays, just 30% of his routes. It's a total cheat code specifically for Warren. The schematic matchup's also great. He's been great against cover 3, top 5 among all wide receivers in target share and fantasy points per route run against cover 3, which the Raiders run a ton. So yeah, I am going with like the Daniel Jones, Tyler Warren, skinny stacks here. You can bring it back with either wide receiver on the Raiders side, as you outlined. I think they're both really strong. Colts secondary just brutal. But yeah, and this is another game where we have like the pass funnel scenario. Raiders are second in pass rate over expectation allowed this season. So yeah, really fun game. I also prefer Jones to the Geno side of things, but can't really knock it too hard.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you can play this game through both quarterbacks. I do prefer Daniel Jones overall, but I think the Geno Smith side is pretty interesting given how bad the Colts secondary looked last week. Ryan, with no Alec Pierce, can I interest you in the guy who fumbled the ball through the back of the end zone last week in AD Mitchell?
Dude, elite call by me, just wanting nothing to do with Adonai Mitchell. We had that clip out on Twitter that I said on this show. Just absolutely brutal. The latest I saw was that they are still working through whether AD Mitchell is going to play. I don't know if that means we finally get Josh Downs in 12 personnel. That would be sick. I kind of doubt it. It might be Ashton Doolin season, unfortunately. But yeah, probably not going to any of those names I just listed and just sticking with Warren and Pittman.
Yeah, I do think if you're playing, something like the Millie, like really large field MME stuff, working Josh Downs into some Daniel Jones stacks is okay. He's only 4,100. Maybe this is finally the week. If there was ever going to be one, this would probably be it where he plays in 12 personnel. I'm not necessarily betting on it, but I do think it's a little interesting for tournaments there. I think we covered, Jonathan Taylor, fantastic play this week. I mean, this is the classic Jonathan Taylor spot. He easily leads all slate eligible running backs in DraftKings fantasy points per game. He's crushed these spots historically. 18% boost to his rushing yards per game, 32% boost to his fantasy points per game in wins compared to losses. Of course, the Colts favored by 7 points here. Graham, anything to add to Jonathan Taylor? He's looking like, again, loaded running back slate, but Taylor certainly looks like one of the best running back plays.
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, he'll be easy to get to as well. I think my way to play it, though, is just don't play JT in game stacks. Just say that the Colts annihilate the Raiders and play them with Colts defense. But yeah, man, we'll get to the cheap running backs this week. It's very, very easy to get up to JT at 8K.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly like that angle. Like I mentioned, Geno Smith throwing a ton of picks can be good for pace. It can also be really good for the Colts defense, which is an easy pairing with Jonathan Taylor here. All right, let's move it on to another pretty fun one. Dallas Cowboys at the New York Jets. Cowboys are favored by 1.5. Total here is 47.5 on the injury front. No CeeDee Lamb or Kevontae Turpin for Dallas. Miles Sanders is questionable. And then on the Jets side, Braylon Allen has been placed on injured reserve with a knee injury. Graham, this is a really good week for George Pickens, Javonte Williams, Jake Ferguson. They're all projecting as very, very strong plays this week. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys side of this game? I think the Jets side is probably a bit more straightforward, just given how condensed their volume has been. But yeah, curious on your thoughts on Dallas.
Yeah, I love Dak. I think Dak is my favorite quarterback for tournaments this week. 6K. He's probably going to come in around 4 or 5%. Sauce Gardner has not been that good this year. In fact, the Jets' outside corners really haven't been that good. And like you mentioned, it's just going to be very condensed. I think you can do a full 3-man stack with this offense and play Dak, Javonte, and George Pickens. Javonte is going to get just another massive workload this week. He's been playing 80% of the snaps. Now Miles Sanders is hurt. They haven't wanted to play Jaden Blue all year. Quentin Williams has not been playing as well this season for Dallas. But the main guy, I think, that's the best play on this slate is Jake Ferguson. The volume is just incredible with him. He has 21 targets over his last 2 games. I think really any way you want to play Dallas side makes sense. Dak with Javonte plus Pickens and Ferguson, or you just want to double stack Dak with Pickens and Ferguson. The bring back to me in those types of stacks and lineups is Garrett Wilson, 6,100. I'll let you guys talk through the Jets side, but Jets is pretty simple too. It's very condensed between, Fields, Wilson, Brees, Mason Taylor, but Garrett Wilson also is probably one of the better value receivers on this slate.
Yeah, absolutely. And really wanted to echo what you said on Jake Ferguson. I love Jake Ferguson as a play. I mean, the volume's been there. If you assume Sauce Gardner does anything to hurt George Pickens, that benefits Jake Ferguson. This is a really, really great spot for a $4,800 Jake Ferguson. Ryan, curious what you think on the Jets side of this game. Like me and Graham said, this is a pretty straightforward stack with, Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson, could, work in a little Breece Hall, maybe a little Mason Taylor. We have triple checked these Jets projections. We are so high on Fields, incredibly high on Garrett Wilson. The Dallas defense is just a total disaster by schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. The Dallas defense is giving up plus 21.6. So, a wide receiver group that would normally average 40 fantasy points per game would be expected to score about 61 fantasy points per game against the Dallas Cowboys, which is just absurd. They're not going to maintain that level of inefficiency all year, but pretty safe to say that this is one of, if not the worst pass defenses in the NFL. Ryan, what do you think of the Jets side of this game?
Yeah, no, this is awesome. Fields projects as by far and away our best value QB on the slate. Early in the week, I kind of thought, okay, Justin Fields chalk, is this really like what we want to be doing? But the rest of the industry is not as aggressive as we are. Like the ownership, I don't think is going to be insane. I think it'll be the highest owned QB on the slate. I don't think he's going to push for like 20% or something like he arguably should. So yeah, I really have no issues here. As you outlined, the Cowboys defense is just so brutal. They've allowed over 120 deep receiving yards per game, which is nearly double that of any other team this season. They are among the top 5 worst defenses of the past 25 years by yards per play allowed. Pretty absurd. Fields obviously can break a slate by rushing. He's a great play. Garrett Wilson, super condensed, very easy, kind of straightforward stack there. When you get into the schematics, the Cowboys play a ton of zone, a ton of cover 3. That's not necessarily great for a Garrett Wilson or for a Fields, just because it makes it a little harder to run, makes it a little harder for Wilson to get one-on-ones. But who does benefit from cover 3 is Mason Taylor. Last week, career high 33% first read target share, second on the team in routes and receiving yards behind only Wilson. I think it's real. This was Brett Whitefield's tight end 4 in this very loaded tight end rookie class. And Taylor kind of shockingly just straight up leads the Jets in receiving yards against cover 3 this year with 89 to Garrett Wilson 66. So I think if you're worried about the total ownership of Wilson plus Fields, you just stick Mason Taylor right on there, showing for 3% projected ownership right now at only 2,800. That just kind of makes the lineup. You can also just play Taylor alone or play only Fields and Taylor. That's also totally viable to me. He's just kind of the skeleton key for stacking this Jets side. And the only other thing I want to say is that both of the running backs in this game are incredible plays. Javonte is like completely elite leverage on everything I just said if these other pieces do end up very highly owned. And Breece Hall, I think, is the best running back play on the slate. So he was at an 85% share of his backfield's carries after Braylon Allen fumbled and left the game with an injury last week. Top 6 at the position in target share. His role is just getting better. The Cowboys have allowed a ton of explosive runs. Breece Hall leads the NFL in explosive run rate, just 5,600. This is pretty absurd to me. I want to play a lot of him. There's on a slate with so many good running back plays. I am pretty sure Breece Hall will be my highest exposure.
Yeah, love me some Breece Hall on this slate. I mean, like we said, all these Jets guys against a defense this bad are looking pretty good. I think the guy that I feel the most unsure about, just relative to ownership, is Justin Fields. Like Ryan said, we don't expect ownership to get totally out of hand here. Probably somewhere in that 12 to 14% range is about what we have projected. But, he's always been one of the most volatile quarterbacks in fantasy football, and I'm always a little wary of Justin Fields in the weeks where he projects as chalk. Another punt that I wanted to throw out there, I was, really excited maybe 8 hours ago to talk about Kevontae Turpin, who was unfortunately ruled out. But I think Jalen Tolbert is a little bit interesting here, just given that there's, no one left after Ferguson and Garrett Wilson, George Pickens, 3,600. There are better cheap wide receiver plays, but I think he's okay, especially if you're stacking this game up. If you wanted to play a lot of Dak Prescott, for instance, I would work a little Jalen Tolbert into those, especially for MME type stuff. All right, let's move it along. Really, really fun game there. Can move it on to a game that is a bit rougher. It's the Houston Texans at the Baltimore Ravens. Texans are 1.5 point favorites. Total here is 40.5. On the injury front, it's all on the Baltimore side, and it's pretty much everybody. No Lamar Jackson, Marlon Humphrey, Chidobe Awuzie, Roquan Smith, or Nnamdi Matabuke. Kyle Hamilton is questionable. Baltimore defense treating this week a bit like a bye. Ryan, this game is very, very gross. 40.5 total doesn't inspire much confidence here. But like you said in our projections meeting, the Ravens defense is either a top 3 defense or bottom 3 defense. And I think we have a pretty good sense of what they're going to be this week with how many starters are out on the defensive side. Absolutely one of the worst defenses in the NFL this week. And that does make the Texans side of this game a little bit tempting. We've seen this backfield condenser around Woody Marks. He had an awesome game last week. CJ Stroud is a reasonable price at 5,200. Nico Collins is only 6,800. What do you think of the Texans here?
Yeah, so I have by far the most interest in Collins. I think he is just a really, really solid tournament play. Ravens allowing already, even before like all of these injuries took hold, they're top 3 in deep receiving yards per game allowed with nearly 60. Collins, we have just seen it, can break any slate. Anytime that CJ Stroud has time to throw, Collins can totally post a massive fantasy performance. So yeah, really like mixing him in. All the best wide receiver plays are just up at the top, and Collins is certainly one of them. With Woody Marks, I have more interest here than I do in Derrick Henry, just from a projected game script perspective and also a schematic matchup perspective, where the Ravens have been especially bad against opposing man gap runs, allowing the second most yards per carry, second highest success rate. That is mostly what the Texans have been doing with Woody. Over 58% of his carries have been on man gap. This is kind of what their OC Nick Caley was famous for, instituting like all of these man gap concepts in the Rams run game when he was over in LA before they brought him here. So yeah, I think Woody at 5%, 5,400 on a slate where there's a lot of other running back value that is going to be much more highly owned is pretty interesting and tempting. I don't know if I would go to CJ Stroud though. Like maybe it's just a mental block for me, but I just feel like CJ Stroud never quite gets there to the point that you need him to. But yeah, pretty interested in the skill players as individual pieces here.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I don't know if I want to stack up CJ Stroud, but $6,800 Nico Collins is a very nice price for a wide receiver that is as talented as him with a matchup this good. Also like Woody Marks for the reasons you outlined. Graham, any other thoughts on this game here?
No, I don't really want to play a whole lot from it, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like both these offenses are bottom 10 in pace. My favorite play in this game is actually Texans defense at 2,400. They're priced as if Lamar is starting, and obviously he's not. I'm with with Ryan, by the way, that Breece Hall is by far and away the best running back play on the slate. It kind of sucks that Marks is just 200 cheaper. And we have Rachaad White. We've got Rico Dowdle as well. But yeah, I think Woody plus Texans defense again makes quite a bit of sense.
Yeah, absolutely does. And I mean, he's not going to draw much ownership. We haven't projected for 5% right now, seeing 2, 3, 4% across the industry. So certainly a good opportunity there. I think you could justify Derrick Henry just on the idea that, what else does Baltimore really have in this game? They're going to have to ride him here, but it is going to be a totally different offense with Cooper Rush starting for the Ravens. He's not going to get the efficiency boost that he normally gets with Lamar Jackson. That said, just looking at his history of games where he gets 20 plus carries, assuming the Ravens can keep this close, I imagine that's about where he ends up. Scores at 30 or more DraftKings points 20% of the time. So there is still some juice to Derrick Henry. It's just a very, very gross game environment. And, it's not terribly hard to see Baltimore falling way behind in this one, which obviously would lend itself more to Justice Hill. All right, got that one out of the way. Let's move on to the Miami Dolphins at the Carolina Panthers. Dolphins are favored by 1.5 here. Total is 45.5. On the injury front, Tyreek Hill done for the year after that brutal knee dislocation in week 4. On the Carolina side, no Chuba Hubbard or Jatavion Sanders. Graham, I'll throw it over to you for the Miami side of this game. This feels pretty straightforward. No Tyreek Hill. Things should be very condensed around Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane. What do you think here?
I love Waddle. I think pound for pound, he's probably the best receiver value on this slate. It's just Tua's regressed to a point where it, kind of feels a little sketchy, but to be honest, it's just like you said, they've got nothing else to kind of design their entire pass game around. And if there were a spot for Tua, this would probably be it. The Panthers are generating the second lowest pressure rate in the NFL right now, just 30%. We've seen Tua, when you take away his first read or pressure him, he just kind of crumbles. This is a spot for some decent passing efficiency. One career game that he played without Tyreek back in week 15 of 2023, Waddle went nuts, had 8 catches, 142 yards and a touchdown. He got 9 targets in that game. That's kind of what I'm expecting, is like 8 to 9 targets, but I don't know if the spiked week efficiency is necessarily there anymore. We've got just a million good running back plays on this slate that I think Devon Achane is my favorite 7K plus guy this week. I know I mentioned I kind of want to keep buying low in Saquon, but I have stared at this, all week. I think Achane's just a better play, straight up. I think he's arguably a better play than Jahmyr Gibbs at his price as well. He's just, the floor is so high. He's averaging just 0.2 fewer fantasy points per game than Bijan Robinson, and this is an amazing spot. Carolina has been getting absolutely trucked on the ground for now 2 straight years. So yeah, I love Achane, love Waddle. It's just, it's kind of scary how much I like the Dolphins given how bad Tua has been this year. But I think as one-offs, I wouldn't really play them together, but as one-offs, I think they make a ton of sense.
Yeah, certainly fair in this game, given how bad the Carolina defense has been. Ryan, on the Carolina side here, obviously Rico Dowdle is projecting as a very, very strong value with no Chuba Hubbard. Dave Canales has been super consistent at giving his lead running back about 75% of backfield XFP over the years. I'm kind of looking for you to talk me down off this ledge, and this is simply a large field MME take, but I kind of like Bryce Young at just 4,700. The stack is really, really easy. It doesn't use almost any salary with him, Tet McMillan, and Tommy Tremble. Tremble projecting as a pretty decent value, had great usage last week and is still only 2,900. This Miami defense has been a disaster. They've also been very vulnerable to quarterback rushing, and that is, when Bryce Young has a ceiling game, it tends to be because he manages to score a touchdown on the ground. Like I said, that's large field tournaments only. I'm not going that direction and single entry, any sort of smaller field type stuff. But yeah, what do you think of Bryce Young, Carolina side overall?
Yeah, you preempted my biggest counter argument, which was that, every big Bryce Young game are the ones where he happens to scramble for a touchdown. But yeah, certainly this is the matchup where he could do that. Probably my better counter argument is that I just prefer Spencer Rattler, which was the dilemma that I brought up in our projections meeting this morning. Is Bryce Young or Spencer Rattler a better play? I would say Rattler is. I totally get it with Young, though. The Dolphins have just been horrific, 4th most schedule adjusted to QBs overall. Totally get it. I have a little bit more interest. I think the way I would rather play this game is kind of, as Graham said, through the one-offs. I think Tet McMillan at 5,700, 9% projected ownership is pretty interesting. Not like an especially strong schematic matchup for him, but just in terms of man and zone, just because the Dolphins don't play that much man, but at least they do blitz a lot, which has helped McMillan quite a bit. His target share grows up to 33% when there's a blitz compared to 18% without one. Again, Dolphins top 4 blitz rate in the NFL. So McMillan kind of interesting. Tommy Tremble is in play as a punt once again. I really prefer Mason Taylor, but I think you could go that way as well.
Yeah, I'm certainly not in love with these Bryce Young stacks. Derek Brown in chat certainly mentioning that Bryce has not been good this year, and that is true. But the craziest Bryce Young stat is that in 3 of his last 7 games, he scored 26 or more DraftKings points. Sure, one of those games he threw 55 pass attempts. The other 2 he ran a touchdown in. But against the Miami defense, I could see it. And again, he's just so cheap here. I do want to get to a little bit of Bryce Young in my 150 sets for this one.
I feel like we didn't emphasize Rico Dowdle enough, probably.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good call.
Yeah, so he is, in terms of cheap running backs, he is by far the play I feel the best about. We have a lot of these guys this week with the Cardinals backfield, the Buccaneers backfield. Dowdle projects the best for us by far of those options. He's going to carry the most ownership, but I feel by far the best about it. So that pretty much tracks. Everything you said about Dave Canales always giving these bell cow roles to his RB1 definitely applies. Dowdle was kind of decent last year on a totally awful and hopeless Cowboys team. Would hit the 100-yard bonus in 4 of his last 6 games that year. 4,300. It's pretty decent. I don't think it's like it's not offensive to me. I will play Dowdle to make some lineups work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of good cheap running back options. I think Rachaad White is just as good. We will get to him shortly here, but certainly like that. And to answer Jose's super chat, I think I would prefer Troy Franklin the most out of those 3 players that you laid out. But yeah, this is a really good game. Graham, any interest before we move on in Darren Waller? No Tyreek Hill. I imagine they try to ramp Waller up a little bit more here, but this is a stacked tight end slate. I'm just not necessarily sure you really need to go that direction unless you're stacking this game up.
Nah, yeah, he only ran a route on 37% of their pass plays, and it seemed like it was just like strictly kind of red zone package stuff. I definitely expect that to come up, but like you mentioned, there's just better tight end plays on the slate. Rico plus Waddle, like if you just want to do a mini stack, makes a ton of sense. We also need to just throw out Malik Washington as a value. I think he's kind of on that similar vein as like Eli Iomanor and Troy Franklin this week at 4K. I'm not like super stoked to play it, just like because I said I'm not super stoked about Tua, but he'll get a full-time role, 6-7 targets, maybe a couple of like manufactured design rush attempts. Again, I don't think there's really a whole lot of reason to pay down at receiver this week just because there's so many good running backs. Rico, we'll talk Rachaad. I think Rachaad White's like the nuts this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Malik Washington is okay. He's a guy that I'll probably get to a little bit of, but really think Troy Franklin is sort of the best play in that range. Let's move it on to the 4 p.m. slate. NFL did bless us this week. 6 games, 1 p.m., 4 games for 4 p.m. So a little bit more even than it has tended to be in previous weeks. Started off with the grossest 4 p.m. game. Tennessee Titans at the Arizona Cardinals. Tennessee 7.5 point underdogs. Total here is 41.5. On the injury front, Calvin Ridley is questionable. And then, of course, on the Arizona side, no Trey Benson or James Conner. Ryan, we'll start off with one of the biggest DFS questions of the week. This is a really good spot for the Arizona backfield. I think the question that a lot of people have, though, is who's going to be getting this backfield work between Michael Carter and Amari DiMercado? What do you think here?
Yeah, so we've projected it to be Michael Carter getting the lion's share of the work on early downs, which is what we should be interested in here, with the Cardinals being 7.5 point favorites and against this Titans defense that is getting gash on the ground. And the reason for that is just looking at the history of how these two backs, Carter and DeMercado, have been utilized. It has, whenever they've played together, which was really only for a short stretch at the end of 2023, it was always Carter playing on a first and second downs, kind of spelling James Conner, and DeMercado just playing in the long down and distance situations on third downs. Broke that down pretty extensively in advanced matchups, which is free this week if you're interested in kind of the nitty gritty usage details of that. But long story short, it results in Carter being a pretty decent value at his 4K Stoneman salary. It's also a pretty decent schematic matchup. Titans are getting gashed by man gap runs. We just saw Woody Marks completely gash them with a bunch of man gap runs. Cardinals could do similar with Carter here. As I said, I prefer Dowdle, but depending like where kind of the final projected ownerships end up, I might not mind pivoting to a good bit of Carter, just because I do feel confident in this matchup and in this game environment. We just feel a little bit less confident in terms of the projected workload that we do compared to Dowdle, which would be the biggest difference. Aside from that, Marvin Harrison Jr. gets a L'Jarius Sneed shadow, which is actually good for him because L'Jarius Sneed has been pretty brutal this year. Trey McBride is Trey McBride. He's the same play every week, where he's one of the most expensive tight ends on the slate. If he scores touchdowns, he'll be the nuts. Will it be this week? I'm not really banking on it. Both those guys are fine, but I think Carter is the guy I'll be most interested in playing on this side of the game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think the main thing to highlight with Carter is he doesn't project as quite as good of a value as Rico Dowdle or Rachaad White, but you're getting a huge ownership discount there. Dowdle and Rachaad White both looking at 20 to 25% projected ownership. We only have Carter for 6% right now. I don't think a lot of people are going to get there. Graham, one of the most curious things to me about this game is that we have Kyler Murray projecting to be pretty chalky. We've got him at 10% projected ownership right now. I'm just never that interested in Kyler Murray, especially if he's going to be chalky. Do you have any interest in stacking up like the Arizona passing attack here? It is pretty straightforward with him, McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., but it feels pretty gross if it's going to be popular.
Kyler's okay. I mean, it's kind of why I like Dak, because like you said that, Kyler's going to be popular, but he's certainly in play. Like, it's a good matchup. Titans secondary is very burnable. I would definitely want to play it with Trey McBride. We've just got so much value at running back this week. It's definitely going to be a lot easier to pay up for McBride, especially with Bowers looking less than 100%, basically, not practicing this back half of this week. McBride is, like we said, I think Jake Ferguson, Tyler Warren, definitely better plays, but I like Trey McBride quite a bit. This is probably the first week I've been pretty interested in playing him. Titans just play so much zone coverage, and McBride has earned a target on 26% of his routes against zone. Harrison is, as always, a little bit lower against zone coverages, 18% of his targets coming against zone. So, yeah, I don't know. I just have major concerns about Cam Ward in this spot. Yeah. But, the Cardinals have been bottom 10 in pressure rate. They're giving up the 5th most passing yards per game. If you want to paint a bull case for this game going, over the total and kind of shooting out a little bit, it is Ward has been okay against the Rams and Colts, and he really struggled in his 2 more difficult matchup against Denver and Houston. I don't know, man. I'm just not excited about Cam Ward. It's not like Cam Ward's not playing that well, and this is the worst coaching staff in the NFL. So it's just like a twofold thing here.
Yeah, these fantasy game logs for Cam Ward have been absolutely brutal. The one thing he's got going for him this week, Arizona tends not to get too much pressure here. Yeah. Ryan, I think the guy that I'm the most interested in on the Titans side would be Alec Iomanner. Only 4,100. Calvin Ridley is beat up here, and the role for Iomanner has been pretty good so far. Again, I think we're all in agreement. Troy Franklin is sort of our favorite wide receiver in this range, but I could be convinced that Io Manor is, probably second or third best wide receiver play in this price range on the slate. What do you think here, Ryan?
Yeah, I would probably rank it Franklin, then Malik Washington, and then Io Manor, and then everybody else. But yeah, he's fine. Don't have a whole lot else to say. Io Manor's been playing better than Ridley per average separation score, per all of our film charters. He is probably good at football, but yeah, just with Cam Ward and how this offense has been playing, it's just really hard to get excited about.
Yeah, we've got an 11.8 fantasy point projection on Cam Ward, and I think that tells you all you need to know about this offense. I mean, when the Cardinals are favored by more than a touchdown, that is always the sign of a terrible team. All right, let's move it on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Seattle Seahawks. Tampa Bay 3-point underdogs here. Total is 44.5. On the injury front, no Mike Evans or Bucky Irving for Tampa Bay. Seattle missing a couple defensive backs in Devon Witherspoon and Julian Love. Ryan, I know you have some interest in the Tampa Bay passing attack here. I thought you had some really interesting angles in advanced matchups.
Yeah, so first of all, Baker Mayfield is an excellent GPP quarterback. Like last year, he had 6 games over 28 DraftKings points. We've seen the ceiling from him. Haven't seen it quite this year. Hasn't had like that insane blow-up game quite yet, but it could be any week. And the reason I think that is because Baker Mayfield is just the most DGAF quarterback in the NFL, where every other QB, when they're faced with all the cover 4 and all the cover 6 looks that the Seahawks like to use, they just say, okay, I'm going to keep it shallow, take the check down, keep it close to the vest. That's not at all what Baker does against cover 4 and 6. He forces the ball downfield, and it actually works too. So he has a league high passer rating against cover 6, top 8 against cover 4. Is leading the NFL in deep throw rate against those two shells in combination. And it's just because he keeps trusting this year Emeka Egbuka to win on these contested chances against those zones. Egbuka up at a 30% target share against cover 4. He's nearly 5 yards per out run against quarters. It's not like, oh, Egbuka is going and roasting everybody one-on-one and beating his man. It's, yeah, Baker will just throw it downfield and let Egbuka do his thing. You saw it on the kind of broken play touchdown last week. Egbuka had 4 targets, 63 yards against cover 4 the week before. This is just how he wants to approach it. So that gives me, not just to be clear, neither of these guys project incredibly well compared to their salaries. They are priced up, but I like the ceiling case here, and I think it can be very volatile. You can throw Chris Godwin in for a double stack as well. He was also awesome against the combination of cover 4 and cover 6 last year. Top 4 in yards per outrun, fantasy points per outrun. Really good utilization last week. 10 targets, only 6 fewer air yards than Egbuka, getting downfield usage. Devon Witherspoon, the Seahawks slot corner, might miss this game, which weakens their secondary further for any routes that Godwin runs out of the slot. So yeah, I really like doubling it up there. You can throw Rachaad White in. I don't think you have to, but I know you guys probably have more conviction on White than I do, so I'll let one of you talk through him.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be a really good role for Rachaad White without Bucky Irving there. Sean Tucker, they've always sort of talked about getting him the ball more, but it's never really played out this way. And, Graham, something you mentioned in our projections meeting was that Rachaad has looked great this year. And I'm in total agreement about that. He's looked really good. And he's always been a great receiver, which makes me feel pretty confident about pairing him up with Baker. Graham, what do you think about Rachaad, this game in general?
Yeah, it's a tough matchup. Seattle's been very good against the run, but I don't know if that matters that much because, like you said, I don't think it'll be a ton of Sean Tucker. It'll probably be, majority of Rachaad White. It's a 1-game sample size with obviously Liam Cohen last year, but Irving left week 14 early last year, and White got 17 carries. Sean Tucker got 3. White had 55% of the pass dropbacks in terms of his involvement. It's right where you want to see. Yeah, 4,700. I just think he's an awesome play. I think it's really close between he and Rico Dowdle, but I slightly prefer White just in terms of projection and just confidence, overall confidence in the offense. Like Carolina, yeah, it's a great matchup, but I mean, Bryce Young has been pretty bad this year. You know, Baker just goes and balls no matter what, no matter where they're at, on the road, at home, bad matchup, good matchup. We got to spend some time talking through JSN, who I think is just the best receiver play on the slate by a considerable margin. 7,100, pretty much the only receiver 7K or more I want to pay up for this week. But I mean, he's the only receiver in Puka Nakua stratosphere right now, averaging 4.3 yards per route run. Nakua's at 4.4. He's getting 44% of the first reads. He's not finished lower than wide receiver 25 on any given week in scoring. He's just got a super high floor. And Sam Darnold and JSN have both been awesome against the blitz this season. JSN's turned his 9 targets into 204 yards against blitzes this year. And obviously, when you face Todd Bowles, you face Tampa, you're going to have to deal with the blitz. So I think there's like some great game stacking potential here for all the reasons that Ryan lined up with Baker. I think Sam Darnold is legitimately in play at 5,100. No one is going to play him. I think, we were talking through Rattler and Bryce Young. Like I can find the 400 or 500 to get up to Sam Darnold, who's, actually pretty good and pretty efficient on a, per drop back basis. And yeah, you just stack him with JSN. There's great bringbacks on Tampa's side. I prefer Rachaad White and Chris Godwin. Like Godwin 5,900 is just a right price. There's not much value there. Same with Emeka Egbuka at 6,900. But yeah, I love this game. I think if you wanted just to like kind of fade the 1 p.m. slate on Maine and pretty much focus on these 4 p.m. games, starting with Tampa and Seattle, then obviously we'll get to Washington and LA and Detroit and Cincinnati. But I think these games in the afternoon, to me, look a lot better, I think, than the early slate this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Another stacked 4 p.m. slate. Certainly want to keep an eye on late swap if you are chasing. But yeah, really want to echo what you said, Graham. I mean, I think this is a really, really good game. A lot of fun angles in this one. You can go a little cheaper at quarterback with Darnold, easy pairing with JSN. Also like Ryan's take on Baker Mayfield. And then we have a very easy way to save salary if you are paying up for all these, fairly expensive wide receivers in Rachaad White. So this is a really fun game. Could easily see this shooting out. Let's move on to the highest total game of the week. It's the Detroit Lions at the Cincinnati Bengals. Lions are favored by 10.5. Total is 49.5. This is also one of the only clean games from an injury perspective. Ryan, I really like leaning into the Lions side of this game. I know Jared Goff is on the road. We tend to want to lean more into Lions onslaught stacks when they are playing at home. But he's also only projecting for about 3% ownership. All the touchdowns are going to Amon-Ra. Jameson Williams is only 4,900. And, Sam Laporta always projects pretty well. He's popping as a solid value in our stuff. Ryan, curious what you think of the Lions side here.
Yeah, I really like it. You set it up well. Goff, normally you would say, well, we want to play him when he's at home. But in these high total games, even on the road, he's been very good. Over 28 DraftKings points in 3 of 5 road games with an implied total over 27. So yeah, I think Goff is right up there with Baker for me as my favorite, like expensive pay up tournament plays. As always with the Lions, just completely onslaughting them is just in play because they will not ever take their foot off the gas. My favorite stacking partner is going to be St. Brown, as you said, just because of the end zone role. And that is so much, as we're finding out, just scoring touchdowns and making big plays is so much of just what matters at the receiver position in fantasy this year, because there are very few offenses that are doing that. And the Lions are one of the only ones that are. From a matchup perspective, also, it kind of pushes me toward St. Brown just because the Bengals have kind of funneled everything underneath this year. Most receiving yards per game allowed on throws within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, but actually the third fewest on the deep ball, which is surprising. I would have expected the Bengals to just be bad everywhere this season. They've shut down the deep ball so far. So yeah, that gives me more interest in St. Brown. Laporta is fine, like on the onslaught type of builds. Bengals are top 3 in schedule adjusted to opposing tight ends as well. But I think probably my favorite piece in this game is just going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. Both for the underneath targets that we're getting, over 5 targets per game from Gibbs. His workload is much better this year than it's been last year. 63% snap share. Like we were praying to get Gibbs above the 50-50 split that we had with him in Montgomery last year. It's happened. He's priced up at 7,700, gonna draw some ownership, but rightfully so. But even David Montgomery is in play. I don't want to give the impression that he's not. Only 5,200. You could just play him alone and say if this game plays a little bit slower and the Lions do take their foot off the gas for whatever reason and maybe salt it away with Montgomery, I think that also works. So yeah, just kind of a lot of interest in all of these Lions. Want to be very aggressive with the game stacks. And I'll let you guys talk through anything I missed there, as well as the Bengals side.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it on the Lions side. Really want to be aggressive with some of those onslaughts here. They have a 30-point implied team total. Next closest team on the main slate is the Colts at just 27. So we're expecting a ton of points from the Lions this week. Obviously, the Bengals defense has been terrible. And yeah, I'm with you. I love Gibbs, and I also think, working a little bit of David Montgomery in there is interesting. Gibbs' XFP percentage of the backfield did slip from 71% to 60% last week. So they might be leaning a little bit more into David Montgomery, and he's played really well. He's actually besting Gibbs so far this season in both yards per carry and yards per target. Graham, curious if you had anything else to add on the Lions side of this game, or if I can interest you in any Bengals here.
Yeah, y'all covered the Lions really well. Bengals to me are like a full fade besides Chase. Want no part of this running game. That's the worst offensive line in football, and Detroit has been a very good run game. T. Higgins is just overpriced. I think you can make a case for Chase at 7,800, just saying, hey, Detroit has been an awesome matchup for opposing wide receivers, specifically on the outside, giving up the 9th most fantasy points per game. And Chase is still getting pretty good volume, averaging 8.2 targets per game and 5.5 full starts together with Browning and Higgins dating back to 23. But yeah, it's scary hours for the Bengals, man. I will say, the one thing I keep coming back to that maybe they can get it going just a little bit this week is, it was 2 worst possible matchups against Denver and Minnesota's super aggressive front sevens. Jake Browning and Zach Taylor just were completely overmatched by better coaching, better personnel on those front sevens. The Lions have a good pass rush with Aiden Hutchinson, but that's really about it. So it's by far the best matchup the Bengals have had. It's just it's scary betting on Jake Browning, man. Browning was okay in 2023, but he's got the second worst catchable throw rate right now, only ahead of Cam Ward. That's not great.
Yeah, it is not. Man, if Burrow was playing in this game, we'd probably be looking at a 54.5 total, and everyone would be screaming to play T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I do like Chase a little bit here just because this Lions secondary is very beat up. It's a good matchup.
Literally no one's going to play him, man. Amon-Ra is going to be 20%. JSN, we were just talking through that. He's going to be 25 or 30%. Chase is going to be 5, 6. Any week Jamar Chase is that low owned in a pretty decent matchup, I'm going to be interested.
Yeah, and something that Ryan has harped on is that when Jake Browning has played, it's really hurt T. Higgins because he doesn't get that design stuff. He doesn't get the design screen targets, but it's helped Jamar Chase a little bit in that sense, in that he goes from getting, very few design targets to getting plenty of them. And, like Graham said, he's just not going to be owned. It's a good game environment. Cincinnati's going to have to throw a ton. Matchup is solid for Chase. Don't mind working him in as a bring back on line stacks. Okay. as a one-off, I would say. Let's move on to the final game of the 4 p.m. slate here. Washington Commanders, 2.5-point underdogs at the Los Angeles Chargers. Total here is 47.5. On the injury front, Jaden Daniels is back, but no Noah Brown or Terry McLaurin for the Commanders. Will Dissly is questionable on the Chargers side. All right, Graham, I was a little bit more excited to play Jaden Daniels earlier in the week. Looks like he's going to be wearing a brace in this one. I think my favorite way to play this game is through Charger stacks, but I'm curious what you think of Jaden Daniels and the Commander side.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Debo is a very good play in this game. Terry McLaurin is out. Noah Brown is out. Debo is a little bit priced up, but 6,300 is still pretty solid for him. I think Garrett Wilson's a slightly better value. I think George Pickens is probably a slightly better value and just a better, more up and pace game. But if Daniels is close to 100%, or if he is 100%, he did get back to full practice, and this game has like massive shootout potential, like just as much shootout potential as Dallas and New York. Chargers are second pass rate over expectation. They just lost Joe Alt. They're down to backups at both tackle positions now. It's not great for Herbert, but Commanders are giving up the 5th most passing fantasy points per game, giving up the 3rd most yards per pass attempt. So I'm with you. I think I like the Chargers side better, but with a condensed Commanders passing attack with really just Debo and Ertz, like there's just a lot of consolidation options, with that side. Herbert, man, I'll kick it to you, Jake. Like Herbert is probably going to be the 2nd most owned quarterback on the slate, but he's got a ton of upside at 6,100, especially if Daniels is right and this game, if Daniels is right, this game has 55-point upside for sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've got Justin Herbert at 12% projected ownership. I think one of the really nice things about playing Justin Herbert right now, Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, and QJ are all similar prices, and they all project as pretty good plays thus right now across the industry, and especially in our stuff. Ryan, really curious what you think of these Chargers pass catchers. I think if we're double stacking Herbert, obviously that leads us to a pretty difficult decision in terms of which 2 guys to pair him with. I keep wanting to buy low on Ladd McConkey. I don't necessarily think that he's playing terribly bad. It's more just that Quentin Johnston has emerged and is a guy that they're really trying to run the offense through at this point. Where are you at on the Chargers side of this game?
Yeah, as insane as it is to say, I don't want to play Herbert without Quentin Johnston. I just imagine time traveling back 5 weeks ago and telling myself that. Johnston has just been the most consistent guy in the end zone here. So he's like who I prefer. Commanders have been pretty vulnerable to the slot. So if you want like a Ladd McConkey reason to buy low, that would be it, I suppose. I guess QJ plus Ladd would be how I'd like to play Herbert. It's just, this would be the 3rd week in a row of me saying, hey guys, Ladd McConkey has a really good matchup. This is the bounce back spot. It was pretty awful the previous 2 weeks. I'm not like as crazy about it. What I am crazy about, maybe not in a great way, is this Jaden Daniels injury stuff. So originally I thought he could be a really good play. Chargers allowing a ton of schedule adjusted production on the ground to opposing quarterbacks, over 50 yards and a touchdown to Mahomes. Same thing to Jackson Dart. We got like a positive quote from Cliff Kingsbury this week saying that they were really overly cautious with Jaden, that they wouldn't be putting him out there if he wasn't going to play like himself. And now we hear that he's going to be playing with the knee brace, which is like, to me, that's just so brutal, considering how Brock Bowers has looked playing with a knee brace. That just gives me it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I like this game environment as well. Chargers allowing a positive pass rate over expectation in every single game. Only the Giants have done that aside from them. So I'm still interested in Jaden Daniels, easy to stack in a condensed manner here with just Deebo Samuel and Zach Ertz, who both have pretty nice schematic matchups against the Chargers, which play a lot of cover or a lot of too high looks and cover 4. But I would rank Daniels probably pretty clearly below like the Herbert stacks, the Goff stacks, the Baker stacks. He's like kind of a little bit of an afterthought for me at this point on the slate.
Yeah, I'm with you. You know, the rushing stuff scares me a bit with Jaden Daniels. And the other thing that I think, you know, does hurt his upside a decent bit is, you know, no Terry McLaurin. And after McLaurin, they really don't have anybody else to catch these deep throws. You know, Chris Moore sort of stepped into this role, but Chris Moore's a 10-year veteran who's never been more than a wide receiver 3. I mean, there's just not a ton of juice in the Washington offense without Terry McLaurin and with Jaden Daniels having his rushing upside a little bit hampered by injury. I think my favorite way to play this game, you know, through Justin Herbert double stacks, and then you can work in a Deebo Samuel, you can work in a Zach Ertz, who both project as fairly reasonable values across the industry. Graham, before we get out of here, got to talk Omari and Hampton. You know, again, this slate is loaded with great running back plays, and he's another one. Led all week 4 running backs with an 87% snap share or 92% of backfield carries. Since Najee Harris went down, no other Chargers running back has earned a touch. Graham, definitely want some Omari and Hampton in a really strong game environment, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's not as good of a matchup as it was last week against the Giants. Washington has been very good against gap blocking concepts, giving up the second fewest or maybe the fewest yards per carry. But yeah, I mean, the floor is just so much higher because he's playing so much more in the passing game. I mean, last week only McCaffrey and Bijan had a higher route share among running backs. Yeah, Hampton is a very, very strong play in the 6K range. I prefer him to Javonte, definitely prefer him to JT. He's probably just the best 6K running back this week by far. It's one of those weeks where I kind of want to play like a little stars and scrubs at running back, like go up and down the board with, you know, Rashad, Rico. I think if this were a more normal week, Omari and Hampton, we'd be pushing for 25, 30%. And just because we have so much value on this slate, he won't be. And that's just another, you know, kind of feather in his cap for this slate.
Yeah, we've got Hampton projected around 20% ownership. Yeah. As Graham mentioned, I mean, the pass catching upside there is really strong. 5 targets for a 12% share. Last week, the Chargers, even being down both starting tackles in week 4, you know, same thing in week 5, still a 14.8% pass rate over expectation. I mean, they're just going to keep chucking the ball, it seems, no matter what. And, you know, Hampton obviously getting high route share, a lot of that pass down work certainly helps his cause. And, you know, just the pace in this game for a guy who looks very likely to get at least 90% of backfield touches certainly makes Hampton a very strong play. All right, I think that does it. Duck, to answer your super chat, I would keep Egbuka, and then yeah, that I don't know if you guys have any takes on that, but I think Egbuka pretty clearly there, right?
Yeah, it's Egbuka for me. I've been meaning to just do like a very long winding tweet about why I don't think you should be fading Egbuka or players that are producing well just because of separation scores. It's not like a good application of average separation score to me. I know that's been like a very big debate on social media the last few weeks. But yeah, in short, that's like not really what I would be using to make determinations of who you should be selling high on, quote unquote.
Yeah, for this season, I'm just keeping it simple. Like the guys who are playing with good quarterbacks like Baker, I mean, they're just so much more valuable than in, you know, past seasons where we've just got like 7 or 8 good quarterbacks. So I'm with you guys.
Yeah. And then Jose super chat. I know I mentioned this earlier, but I would certainly prefer Troy Franklin this week. Talked a good bit, you know, all those guys are priced pretty similarly in DFS. So talked a decent bit about that throughout the show, but that'll do it for week 5. Cashing Points. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in, all of the comments and the super chats. Much appreciated, guys. And we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.